Okay, hello, okay. All right, guys, we're about to start. And the first thing that I wanted to make sure is that we can be heard online. Maybe if we can, just let me know, those people online. Just a reminder, this is a seminar of the Bologna Institute for Policy Research at SAIS. We hold regular seminars, as you know, twice a week, and hold other events as well. I hope you have enjoyed our program so far this year. We're looking forward to hosting more events next year. But it is my great pleasure and honor today to, I think I will just pass the floor over to Flavia Giacobbe, who's a journalist at Formiche. And she will take the lead from here and conduct the panel. So Flavia, thank you for coming, and let's begin.
Thank you, Professor. Good evening, everyone. I would like to thank you who are here today, but also our audience that is following us remotely and from Formiche website. My gratitude also goes to the John Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies as AIS and the Bologna Institute for Policy Research for promoting this meeting dedicated to past and future relations between China and Europe. I welcome Professor Romano Prodi, who will soon take the floor for his keynote speech, and Enrico Fardella, professor of the University of Naples L'Orientale. Welcome. And Sergey Radchenko, professor at the John Hopkins University, SAIS, who is hosting us today. Thank you. So, the third millennium is marked by a systemic challenge involving the United States and China. Just a few days ago, President Biden and President Xi Jinping met for their first face-to-face meeting of the year, a meeting that led the two powers to resume military communication, which were disrupted after Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan. Europe is a third-party actor in this confrontation, sharing democratic ideals and values with Washington. President von der Leyen says that China seeks a global order contrary to our values. We are at a critical juncture in the EU-China relation. A dialogue of the death, as described by Borrell after the last EU-China meeting held right after Russian invasion of Ukraine. A new EU-China summit will take place in Beijing shortly, and the prospects so far looks quite grim. EU-China relation, as the title reveals, moved from embrace to disgrace. The logic of engagement that favored connectivity has created interdependence between the EU and China. Since 2012, China under Xi Jinping leadership has become more assertive, undermining the logic that had previously inspired the policies of engagement. Europe has therefore reacted, and it is now implementing a more prudent approach aimed at de-risking its dependence over China, for example, in critical materials and green technologies for energy transition, both as a manufacturing hub and as a market. This de-risking strategy, however, is being interpreted in the wide range of policies among the different EU countries. Moreover, as you may know, today Henry Kissinger has died, he was pivotal in strengthening US and China relations. Today, we will start from the past to investigate the evolution and the current state of relations between Europe and China, from the Cold War to the new strategic rivalry between Washington and Beijing, and how it affects Europe. During President Prodi's years as head of the European Commission, China-EU relation experienced profound evolutions, especially between 2001 and 2003. Professor, those were probably the years when the engagement strategy of the EU towards China reached the highest point. In retrospect, how do you evaluate what approach and which kind of lessons can we draw from that experience? Please, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you for the invitation. It's a great pleasure, even if it's not easy to speak about the experience of happy cooperation in a moment in which nothing is going in the same direction. But I have to tell the truth and to try to understand the change of it, You correctly stated that I was president of the Commission Union late 99 to 2005, and we had yearly meetings with the United States, with China, and with Russia. And it was absolutely normal for all of that, So it's I found incredible that a relation has been broken because there was exchange of views. There was, and clearly, as you hinted, it was the most cooperative moment of our history, and you correctly stressed that in 2001 China entered in WTO, and so this is a symbolic year, but it's simply the signal that the world future was, let's say, based on the development of globalization, in which China had a role. And in that moment, it was an active period of American investments into China, and it was the foundation of a relation that it is even now in a difficult time is going on, in the sense that there is this fighting on high technology, but almost 1/3 of Chinese export till 1 year ago, at least, were had the sources of multinational companies owned mainly by United States, and the absurd period of November last year, in 1 year ago, in which the tension between US and China were at the highest point, but the Los Angeles port was unable to receive all the imports coming from China, So this is the very complicated relation. But going specifically to the European relations, I tell you that China had clearly in mind that Europe could play a role that could have brought to a multipolar world. This was the clear. I tell you, when during my period in the meeting with the Chinese president, as you know, in these bilateral meetings, you have everything. You go with a book like that, with butter and grinding machines and so on and so on and so on. And the Chinese president was interested only to the euro. Well, really, the Deutschmark and the French franc will disappear. No question about the lira, but anyway, really, you will have a paper, yes, And the last question was, can we take, do you think and do you advise to take the euro among the Chinese reserves? And my answer was, okay, of course. The last statement of the last meeting of the Chinese president was, okay, we shall buy as many euros, as many dollars we shall have in our reserves, as many euros, as many dollars, because if side by side with the dollar there is the euro, there will be room also for the renminbi. Typically political statement, not an economic statement, because we think that the euro will evaluate, but simply the idea that Europe will be the instruments to have a paritarian, let's say a multipolar world. And this has been impressing me because it gives you how Europe could in that moment be the referee, at least, or the mediator between China and the United States. And they started to do that. But when the financial crisis arrived and the Chinese perceived that the Europeans were divided and they were unable to tackle the problem, you remember well that the crisis was originated inside the United States, but they came out of it because there was a policy of easy money and so on and so on and so on. And in Europe, we were divided between South and North, the tension between Germany and Greece, the idea of the disruption of the euro. And so this new trend started to, let's say, to be in danger. And step by step, the Chinese stopped to do this parity. And now I think they have around 20% of their reserve in dollars and not 50, as they stated in that moment, And this is symbolic of how were the relations. Also because the China, of course, the economic aspect was in some way dominating, and the Chinese expert was Wen Jiabao, and Jiabao was very open to globalization and very open to Europe, and so this was a very but the hesitation of China to buy euro started before Xi Jinping has already started, and with Xi Jinping, this has become a doctrine, to start to close, to not to increase the reserves even in dollars, and to close step by step with the Western world. But Europe in the following period went on with an engagement with China, and for years and years there was a global discussion on the investment comprehensive agreement, but it was a document not immediately operational, but some sort of long-term engagement. It was quite interesting because it was, not on our side. We didn't trust 100% on the, let's say, on the consequence of it. But the idea was to prepare step by step a closer economic relation, comprehensive not only of investment but also of trade, going on the rules, trying to let's say, to meet the European complaints of the Chinese behavior on patents, on trade rules, and so on and so on and so on. And this negotiation went on for, I think, 7 years. And that the last moment in which the European relation seemed to be different from the American ones that were deteriorating step by step is politically quite interesting. In the short period between Trump and Biden, that there are a couple of months in which there is an empty space. The European Commission, under the German push, approved the investment comprehensive agreement after 7 years of negotiation. They found the open window, because so they should have avoided the Trump opposition, and they didn't know precisely what Biden would have, decided. But as soon as Biden arrived, the agreement was blocked, also because it was a moment of incredible political tensions between the European Parliament and China, with the reciprocal sanctions. The Chinese were so inappropriate to take sanctions against European members of the Parliament, with the idea that, let's say, to do that couldn't have had such a big reaction in Europe. And so since that moment, the European relation with China, they were totally under the American rule. And even now, after the German change, there is no European. Next week, there will be, you told me, the meeting of the European Commission with the Chinese government, and I don't know if something new will happen. I doubt, for a simple reason that, sorry that I am so blunt, but Europe now is already under election campaign, and under election campaign, Europe is under election campaign, and the highest probability of von der Leyen to be reappointed is to do nothing, because the alliance is quiet, good, but so don't move the waters. And so Brussels is already in a moment of let's say, the less we do, the better is. And so I don't think that is the best moment for taking innovative decision. But anyway, we shall see in 1 week if this is true. But this brings me to a general observation that worries me a lot, that democracy is always going on period of slow decisions, of breaks to his life, and the dictatorial countries, they can make big mistakes, big achievements, but in any way they can have a long-range policy. And what the real difference between, in my opinion, between Chinese policy and the Western policy, European or American, is long range versus short range, And this is, well, of course, this is both a consequence of the difference of political system, but is also a consequence of the difference structure of the US and Chinese economy, because China is 1.4 billion people, almost 20%, 19% of mankind, and the biggest industrial power in the world, in terms not of technology but of quantity. And so They need. They have no energy. They no food enough. They have no raw materials, and they have a coherent policy since 45 years to buy or to find it where it is. And they have no doctrine. They do deals with Brazil, with democratic Brazil, with authoritarian Africa, and United States, they have everything, and so the policy depends upon their policy, and they have a democratic country, and their policy depends upon the presidential choice. But so China is predictable, and US is not predictable, and this makes, in my opinion, a lot of difference. Or African countries, which I was talking, for a long time, the idea was, look, Chinese, we know what they do. We don't like many things they do, but we know what they do. You Western European or American, we don't know what you do because we don't know what the new presidents will do or your new government in Italy will do. Also, this makes, in my opinion, a problem. This is a problem, short-term view against long-term view. Of course, you can make the incredible, horrible mistakes like Putin did, but I stress only the point of long-term policy. This is what I think. I think I have exploited all my time. I'm ready, of course, for the debate because last problem. I found China last week. I came back only 10 days ago. I found China different from all the 45 years. No, I started in 1984, less than 45 years, but almost. In which is a moment of uncertainty, is a moment of, let's say, people who discuss about young unemployment, in China, that is incredible. Is a moment in which, there is, the president fired the Minister of Foreign Affairs and the Minister of Defense without any public explanation. There is a moment when I was in China, there was died the former prime minister, who was prime minister with the Xi for more than 9 years, very intelligent, very strong guy. And the day he died at 10 o'clock in the night and at 9 a.m. in the morning, the day after, the vice president of the republic inaugurated our meeting, and he didn't mention the death of the prime minister, So then people brought flowers to his home, and so the Chinese president remembered him, and so on and so on. But so you see from all these things, and then in China you cannot go to Tiananmen Square if you don't book the day before. Can you? It was, for me, it was just, and so I put a question mark on everything I had experienced last week, 2 weeks ago. So, but anyway, there is something in process. Maybe simply a moment of the president who wants to reassert his power, or there is some fight for power. I don't know.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Prodi. Thank you for your intervention, for your testimony. I would like now to pass the floor to Professor Enrico Fardella, who will look at the most recent stage of the EU-People's Republic relations and the emergence of their systemic rivalry.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Flavia. First of all, let me thank you all by standing because I don't see you. Thank you so much for being here. I see also familiar face, and I must first start by thanking, of course, the host of this event. And I must confess that actually I was not invited. I made myself invited here. I studied here at the end of 1990s, and I love Bologna. I used to come here. This place was for me. I still had some hair on my head, and this place was really magic for me. So wonderful memories. I'm so happy that you guys are having this experience. I think that this is unforgettable. And in terms of like, before I start saying something, too many romantic things, let's focus on China. Well, at the time, China was, so anyway, thank you, Sergey. Thank you, Alessandra, Susanna, Dean, everyone who made this happen. So when I was here, I was studying here contemporary history in Bologna, and that's the moment when I actually literally bump into China. I like playing chess, and then by playing chess, eventually I start studying Chinese chess and Chinese culture, philosophy, history, politics, and then I never stopped basically. I spent 17 years in Beijing. I worked at Peking University until last year, and then during COVID, because of many other things, I moved to Italy. Now I'm working at University of Naples, Oriental Studies University. At the time, the end of 1990s, beginning of year 2000, 2001, China joined the WTO. That was President Prodi was the president of the European Commission. That was like a really pivotal moment in the way how we, the West and Europe, was looking at China. As a matter of fact, this year we celebrate the 20 years of comprehensive strategic partnership with China, with the PRC. Sorry, I should call it PRC actually. That was signed in 2003. The relationship now looks very much different. So let me just say briefly, because I would like to discuss with you more instead of like monopolizing the time. Let me say something about the transition, or how we got lost in transition between engagement and disengagement, or engagement and how they like to call it these days, the risking, which is like the elegant face of disengagement. And what is going on in these days, and some consideration about the future. Lost in translation from embrace to disgrace. So the China that I grew up with was the rise of China at the time was actually made all European countries, diplomats at EU, believing that interdependence was actually part of our national interest. That was a concept that was ingrained, in the liberal notion and the liberal order. So paradoxically, we can say that the rise of China, by reinforcing interdependence, also, strengthened until a certain point the liberal order. What happened is that there was a moment, especially we normally tend to associate this with the rise of Xi Jinping, 2012, the first mandate of Xi Jinping, when there was a change in the interpretation that became more and more assertive of PRC rise within this order. And so interdependence moved from being like a component of national interest of European countries into more and more into a challenge for our national interest, and more a challenge for our national security. And, fast forward, we end up in 2019 when China, all of a sudden, in the strategic outlook of the European Commission, becomes labeled as not just a partner, not just a competitor. It was already but become a systemic rival. The president of the European Commission, von der Leyen, said that the Chinese Communist Party actually explicitly said that the Chinese Communist Party wants to revise the international order. So the PRC becomes a systemic rival because it's trying to revise an order in which the European Union recognizes itself. And so we had, the sanction and exchange of sanctions for Xinjiang and human rights, and then a coercive diplomacy for Lithuanian change, or, tuning the name of Taiwan representation in Lithuania. And so China started applying coercive action against Lithuania, and of course the European Union reacted. And then, last but not the least, Beijing position over Ukraine, which was, of course, a turning point also in this direction. Something that, to be honest, I think that my Chinese colleagues never really grasped, how important is today, the position that China has taken over Ukraine. Anyway, we can discuss about it later. So, as Sullivan, the U.S. National Security Advisor recently said in a beautiful article on Foreign Affairs, so the challenge of today is how we can manage rivalry in an age of interdependence. So you have a European Union that discovered all of a sudden that 52%, this is like not my own data, this is a data that the Law Institute recently published a very interesting report on this. So I quote from them, 52% of European strategic imports are coming from China. We can define then in the Q&A what we're talking about. But if you look at the graphs, and the data is actually impressive. But what is even more impressive, and so these imports are justifying, the way how Europe is trying to de-risk, to revise this over-reliance on China. Especially because China has tried, to weaponize, to use like a terminology that is very popular in Brussels, to weaponize this kind of over-reliance that the European Union has over Chinese imports. But what is even more interesting is that actually if Europe is dependent on China for its imports, China is even more dependent on the European market for exports. And this is something that is basically inspiring and justifying to a certain extent some of the recent implementation of defense tools by the European Union. A very interesting evidence that is emerging in these last few months is that the European Union members and the European Union as a whole is becoming much less risk averse. So towards China, in the sense that before you could see, for example, countries like Germany, that is among all the European Union members, is the one that is much more exposed, or to use a more, a soft term, more integrated, with the Chinese market, has always been reliant somehow to follow, position taken by the Commission of over-criticism, such as the one taken by the von der Leyen vis-à-vis Beijing. But more recently, you have, even in Germany, a lot of movements going on. For example, very recently, I think last week, the Minister of Interior made like a very important decision on the reduction of the dependence on Huawei 5G technology from German IT, which is actually creating a lot of discussion among telecom operators within Germany. But this is a fact. This is actually something completely new. 1 week ago, there was the anti-coercion instrument among all the many defense tools that the European Union Brussels is implementing has been approved. This is a system of deterrence as defined by EU, but so basically the Commission can identify any country, and this is actually somehow related to Italy. I will tell you why. Maybe related to Italy. So the Commission basically can identify a country that is actually acting coercively towards a European Union, towards the European Union market, or towards a member of the European Union, and therefore apply some very interesting and wide countermeasure as a retaliation. As a response, a couple of days ago, the PRC already implemented some restriction for some rare materials that China controls, and they are very important especially for the green transition of European economy. A green transition that, as you may imagine, as you know, after the Ukrainian war, and the redefinition of our dependence from energetic dependence from Russia is becoming more and more urgent and important. Sure. So China is key actor in this transition, paradoxically. And so this kind of restriction for rare materials, it's a very strong weapon that China has vis-a-vis the European Union. As a matter of fact, China last week decided that start implementing, exports to ask export permits for graphite. Graphite, China produce 65% of graphite, which is like a key mineral for batteries, which is, batteries is central for electric vehicles. And as a matter of fact, the European Union in September start like investigation on the Chinese automakers' subsidies for electric vehicles production, which is going to become like a central key, because China is already putting, controlling imports for electric vehicles from Europe, and Europe therefore has a space also to reciprocate. So this is going to be a very important issue of more friction than anything else. So next week, as President Prodi said, is going to be the meeting in Beijing between the European Union and the Chinese government. The last one was a month after the beginning of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And Borrell at the time was responsible for the European Union external action, said that was a dialogue of the deaf. Nothing has really changed. There were in the last month 8 commissioners traveled to Beijing. There is not a clear agenda on what is going on, probably for the reason that Romano mentioned, in the sense that we are already in Europe in electoral campaign, so nobody wants to actually commit to something explicit. The People's Republic of China is actually asking, especially after the meeting, I would say, productive meeting between Biden and Xi Jinping in San Francisco a few days ago. The PRC start calling on Europe to rebuild strategic trust, but the European officials, they're actually looking for tangible results of these never-ending dialogues that actually are not actually solving the main issues that for the European Union, European members are very important, because this is talking about, unemployment, it's talking about, production. It's just something that, especially politically, is something that is quite relevant for the EU. Let me just conclude with some thoughts, which is actually the part that I cherish the most, because, I think this is something that it's a little bit strong probably, but having spent so much time in China and, given that, I really have passion for the country, I think it is something that matters to me. And it's talk about the importance of re-engagement of China. But, when people say re-engaging China, say, okay, this is another one, and there's a panda hugger, okay, here we go, spend time in China, Stendhal syndrome or Stockholm syndrome, according to the perspective. No, this is not the case. The thing is that engaging a rise in China was one thing. What I'm talking about is engaging a decline in China. What I see is that we keep analyzing China as a rising power, but in fact, besides the tone of the propaganda, the most urgent need for Beijing these days is not global dominance, but is actually trying to focus on a very painful, urgent, and extremely costly rebalance of its economy. A rebalance that is supposed to take place from over-reliance of supply, exports, and focus on demand, especially building, reinforcing immediately consumption. This is not because I say it. This is because it's like now this is a trend. I mean, my friend and mentor, Michael Pettis, that in my opinion has built the best interpretative scheme, is a model for to analyze, the current China crisis, has been saying for more than 15 years, and now is mainstream, thanks God. So let me just say what Michael basically say, and then drag some implication of it at a political level. So basically, we can say that for the China successful rise, the China dream, the rejuvenation of the Chinese nation hasn't happened in a vacuum. It's been sustained by Western capacity to absorb the excess of Chinese production. The problem is that this capacity is over. There is no more space to absorb any more China's growth. So it's necessary, in order to create the basis for a more productive and less conflictual relationship between China and the West as a whole, European Union first and foremost, is necessary to correct, within China, this economic model. There are many economists discussing about it. Yesterday, the head of the People's Bank of China, for the first time, officially made a official declaration that actually is talking about this point. The problem is that this has a very high political cost, because for all these 20 years, this is something that actually Wen Jiabao said in 2007, we have to change political economic model. But as we know that this is very difficult. There is a strong vested interest in keep running this economic model, and the correction is very politically costly and probably suicidal at this point. Anyway, so the problem is that the narrative within the Chinese Communist Party has been completely forgetting and expelling the role of the West, the West and the cooperation with the West had on the China rise. So what happened is that now it seems that the China dream under Xi Jinping version is only the product of the genius of the Chinese Communist Party. Okay, the role of the West that is actually still going on has been completely erased and has to be brought back. So this change of narrative, only this change of narrative can create, in my opinion, the space within China for a correction of domestic politics that can generate, a more rational, implementation of this economic reform, or the reform of this economic model. So we saw a month before the Biden-Xi Jinping meeting, we saw how actually this narrative has started changing. I don't know if you're following this. I don't know what flying tigers are. But in China, there was a lot of discussion on a strong presentation, a better image of the US. All of a sudden, the US are good. I mean, we're good. They moved from being like the evil edge and cynical hegemon into let's remember the good times. Okay, this is good. Okay, this is not bad. I mean, because this is exactly what is supposed to happen. And the idea is that engaging this discourse, being proactive in this discourse, reinforcing this discourse, I think, in my opinion, can generate positive results. So, but the problem is that if this evolution, this direction, and next week meeting with the European Union will prove it, will continue, this is a good sign. Otherwise, if China moves back to the discourse of struggle, which is like, it's been a key word, in the party narrative, to show that China is leading, anti-Western forces, and struggle basically is the code word for revising the international order, the liberal international order. If they continue in this direction, yes, it's true that these may have a destructive impact on the liberal order, but the paradox is that Beijing may be the one to pay the highest price for that. Thank you so much.
I start the dialogue with one short observation. The change of the Chinese model, the declaration is we move to the internal market more and more, and to neighbor. But, the Xi, for moral reasons, I don't know, but he decreased the salary of all the public employees. So this is completely against the moving to internal market. And then even that for paritarian reason, he declared illegal the additional teaching that is done to the student. And in China, additional teaching is. And so millions of young teachers are unemployed. A lot of millions of young people are unemployed. So this is why I found this uncertainty between declaration and policy.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you, Professor Fardella, for your speech. I remember you that after the speeches, it will be possible to ask a question to the speakers by raising your hand. So we now count to the last.
It's compulsory.
So we now come to the last speaker, Professor Radchenko, who will explain how interpreting the unlimited partnership between China and Russia conditions the relationship with the West. Please.
Thank you, Flavia. Thank you for also allowing me to speak after this distinguished speakers on a subject I don't really know all that much about. Although I do have a long connection to China. Enrico, when President Prodi was meeting with Hu Jintao, we were hugging pandas together in Beijing. I remember many years ago, 20 years ago, we were younger. We were younger then. Yes, we were. We had a good time, the good old times. Yes, back when. We're still having a good time. Thank you. Much better time. That's right. Maybe not like China does today, judging by some of the remarks that have been made. But we discussed prior to this presentation about our division of responsibilities. And since my focus, as some of you would know, has been on Russia and China relationship, this is something I know much more about. I thought that I would maybe say a few things about where I think this relationship is heading today, and what that potentially means for Europe, for the transatlantic relationship. I won't take much of your time because I'm very keen to actually move to the Q&A session. My sense is that the Sino-Russian relationship is not as close as some of us fear, but also not as broken as some of us hope. Well, paraphrasing Churchill. When Secretary of State Blinken made a speech recently at SAIS, some of you may have heard that speech or read about it. He talked about the importance of opposing the partnership, the unlimited partnership between China and Russia. And when I heard that, I thought, well, wait a second. Why is he talking about the unlimited partnership between China and Russia when China and Russia do not actually use that term? And you might say, well, wait, they did use this term, and that is also right. They used it in their joint statement on February 4th, 2022. This is the statement that struck a lot of people as being very ideological in content. There was a lot of there, about a lot of things there about opposing the multipolar world, about unlimited partnership and so on and so forth. But they haven't really used that phrase since, which is interesting. The phrase has disappeared from their discourse, from their shared narrative. And you have to ask why this has happened. I think some of that has to do with what has happened in Ukraine. There is a view that Putin went to China in order to inform Xi Jinping. This was, of course, on the day of the opening of the Beijing Olympics, about Russia's invasion of Ukraine. I don't buy it for a second. I think it's completely rubbish, this view. Putin did not inform Xi Jinping that he was going to invade Ukraine. Why is that? Because he did not even inform some of his closest, maybe some of his closest advisors certainly knew about it, but even some fairly senior figures in the Russian leadership did not even know that Putin was going to invade Ukraine. So why would he inform Xi Jinping? This is not such a close relationship that would allow something like that. When people talk about a Russian, the American Republican candidate, Vivek Ramaswamy, likes to talk about how, if he becomes president, he will make Russia quit its military alliance with China. Have you seen that? And you read that and you think, okay, this is insane. This is insane. What is he talking about? First of all, this is not a military alliance. It is not like NATO. There's no Article 5. There's no interoperability between China and Russia. They have some joint exercises occasionally, and they have a lot of joint rhetoric on occasion, some similar rhetoric, but this is not a military alliance, not at all a military alliance. Anyway, so Putin went to China. He certainly did not ask Xi Jinping to back his invasion of Ukraine. It is important, however, to know that China has been helpful to Russia on Ukraine. Why has it been helpful? Well, the obvious reason is that Xi Jinping does not want to throw Russia, or in particular Putin, under the bus. Russia, for all of its unpredictability, and we talked about, and President Prodi rightly pointed out, drew attention to China's kind of relative predictability. We know what they will do. With Russia, it's not like that. They have been sort of going off the rails. They've been doing things that nobody would have predicted them to be doing. The Chinese are clearly not happy about it. But for all of their unpredictability, the Chinese understand that Russia is the best partner they have out there. Who's out there for China that is better than Russia? Is it maybe North Korea? They do talk about relation between China and North Korea as an alliance between this relationship between lips and teeth. But I mean, come on, North Korea. Okay, it doesn't really matter. North Korea, in the great scheme of things, it doesn't have strategic significance, strategic importance. Is it maybe, I don't know, who is it? Is it Burma? Is it Iran? No, all of those relationships are actually not quite as important to China as that major relationship with Russia. They treasure this relationship, and they don't want to see Putin suffer a defeat, because that could potentially destabilize Russia and could lead to all kinds of undesirable circumstances or consequences for China. If Russia suffered defeat, which by the way is highly unlikely at this stage, as we see in Ukraine, may well happen still, but I don't see it happening in the not in the near future. What would China do? Well, China would embrace Russia's defeat. That's okay. The Chinese are very pragmatic. The Chinese are very good at one thing, looking after their own national interests. They're very, very good at this. And so they view Russia through this pragmatic lens. Putin, good. No Putin, okay, it's fine. We'll figure it out. But having Putin in there and fighting a war in Ukraine, kind of, from Chinese perspective, okay, they have accepted this has become inevitable, and they are supporting Russia indirectly, and that is important. And I emphasize the word indirectly. In which ways? Well, for example, Russia is selling its hydrocarbons to China at an astonishing rate, and that is very important for the Russian budget because, of course, they have to pay for the military and in order to conduct this war. The Chinese are by the way, the Chinese are making a killing off of the war in Ukraine. Did you know? And that's a fun fact, maybe not so fun. But it's possible now using Chinese custom statistic to calculate after the oil cap was introduced. We've heard about the oil cap on Russian oil. After the oil cap was introduced about a year ago, there was a kind of a redirection of Russian oil. Where did it go? Mainly to India and China. Because of the release of Chinese custom statistics, it's actually possible to calculate the discount that the Russians are giving. Guess how much the Chinese have won or the Russians have lost as a result of the Western oil cap on the Russian oil. It's close from last year until August. That's the last statistics that I've seen. I haven't checked the latest release. I don't know if they've released for after August, but until August, the Russians, it was less than 50%, but the Chinese underpaid $9 billion to Russia. $9 billion. That's a lot of money. You know how many drones you can buy with $9 billion? A lot of money. So yeah, okay, but still, they are being, the Russians are able to sell that oil. They are able to sell some gas. They have a pipeline. It's called Power of Siberia. Of course, we know Power of Siberia that goes to China and where through which the Russians are able to sell their gas at a very steeply discounted price. Actually, seemingly at a loss. Actually, it's a loss-making proposition for Russia. Putin has been very keen to try to build another pipeline called Power of Siberia 2. You know why he wants it? That is because the European Union blocked Russia's gas, more or less, or some of it obviously exploded in Nord Stream 1 and 2. So this gas comes from Yamal in Western Siberia, and it's just kind of sitting there. And so one of the things that the Russians have been very keen to do is to redirect this gas to China. And they've been saying this for almost years now. They've been saying it's all done, it's a done deal, it's coming. Nothing is coming. The Chinese are not signing the contract. Why are they not signing the contract? I don't know. Maybe because they don't like the price. That's a good possibility. Maybe they're bargaining for a better price. They're good at bargaining. Maybe they don't like dependency on Russia. I don't blame them. for this. In any case, Power of Siberia 2 has not been signed, and that means that Russia is not able to sell its gas. But, okay, it's still selling a lot of resources. What about China's exports to Russia? That is also important because, of course, we know that the European Union, at a considerable cost to itself, of course, banned a lot of exports to Russia, a lot of trade with Russia. And so Russia needs to replace its various things that it used to import from the West with things that are made in China. And if you look at the trade statistic, you'll discover that last year the biggest item of Chinese exports to Russia was, you would be surprised, it was cars, because guess what? Western cars are no longer, you can no longer import them except I guess you can do it through Kyrgyzstan and places like that. But generally speaking, it's difficult. So therefore, the Chinese came in with $6 billion worth of cars and selling those cars on the Russian market. And also things like cell phones and things like refrigerators and things like television sets. Russia is becoming into a really great market for Chinese goods. No wonder that this year, in fact, the trade turnover between the two countries will reach $200 billion. China is Russia's number one partner, but that's not news. That has been this since 2010, in fact, so already for 13 years, and alone has displayed Germany. But what's interesting is this year, Russia has entered China's top 10 trading partners, which is still okay. You can see the difference, right? For China, if Russia disappears, okay, they'll lose one of their, number 10 trading partner. For Russia, if China disappears, they're basically screwed because more than 25% of their bilateral trade is with China, and they rely on some pretty important things, including, by the way, chips that they import through China, through, obviously in various ways evading Western sanctions, and that also helps them prosecute their war in Ukraine. So yes, China has been a lifeline for the Russians, but that is not to say that the Chinese have been too keen to actually push the boundaries and extend their help to the Russians, for example, in the sphere of selling weapons. And this is where it becomes really interesting. And this is where we come to what Enrico was talking about the different the concerns the Chinese have, and also President Prodi was talking about this, concerns that the economic concerns the Chinese have about Europe, and the fear of secondary sanctions that they could come under, not just by the Americans, but also by the Europeans. In fact, we know already that when the first news of potential Chinese weapons sales to Russia became known, Jake Sullivan in Rome, as a matter of fact, met with I guess it was Yang Jiechi. It was Yang Jiechi. They met in Rome, and some red lines were drawn. Do not sell weapons to Russia. And the Chinese have, by and large, abstained from this. The Russians need weapons. They get their drones from Iran. They get their artillery from North Korea, full places. But the Chinese have not been selling weapons. So that, again, shows the Chinese economic interest in this case outweigh political interest. But it is, I think President Prodi was right to point out that there's an issue here for the Chinese in the sense that Xi Jinping does not always prioritize economics. He could prioritize politics as well. So if Russia ended up in a desperate situation, which it doesn't look like at the moment, suppose they ended up in a desperate situation, then would China increase their supplies to Russia, potentially crossing those red lines and providing weapons? Maybe they would. I don't know, but maybe they would, because they would prioritize politics over the question of economics. But the Chinese interests in this conflict in Ukraine are also limited. They do not include. First of all, the Chinese are really worried about escalation. They don't want escalation. Who wants escalation? Not the Chinese. This would have negative consequences for them economically and politically, etc. So they don't want escalation. They're also quite sour on the idea of Russia using nuclear weapons in Ukraine. Who is not? Obviously, everybody is sour on this idea, except maybe for the Russians in their worst dreams. Sometimes they And they talk about nuking parts of Ukraine and things like that. But, some of that nuclear rhetoric has actually dissipated. We heard a lot of that over the previous month. Xi Jinping, by the way, has put himself on record that he was not happy about this. When Scholz went to Beijing, he raised that with Scholz, saying, we don't like that. And I think this is a message that registered in Moscow. Does that mean if push comes to shove and Russia is absolutely desperate and is losing the war or something like that, which I don't see coming in the moment, but anyway, suppose they were in this situation, will then the Russians ask Xi Jinping before using nuclear weapons? I don't think so. This is where it actually becomes very interesting, because some people assume that because Russia is so dependent on China, that China basically can force Russia to do anything it wants. That is absolutely not the case. In fact, for all the economic dependence, China actually exercises very limited leverage over Russia. Bizarrely, why is that? Because they know that if they were to impose economic sanctions or try to crack the whip or try to do something with Putin, that could backfire against them, and they would lose their key partner, and they would undermine their key partner, and that is not in their interests either. So they have been kind of signaling their dissatisfaction to the Russians through those kind of statements, like with Scholz or with Macron. There have been those statements from China: we don't like where this is going, and so on. But they have been very, very careful. Because they have been very, they don't want to upset the Russians. Finally, what I wanted to say about the situation is what is fundamentally China's interest. I don't think China's interest is in Russia, annexing Ukraine or something like that. I think they would see it as a bad idea. But I think what they also don't want to see Russia's defeat. What they do want to see, in my view, and I defer to those like President Prodi and Enrico, who know better about this. But my sense is that they would be interested in the frozen conflict. Why would they be interested in frozen conflict in Ukraine? That is because Russia, through the stupidity of its leadership, one-sided, fixation on this anti-Western, anti-hegemonic discourse on Putin's part, his obsessive dreams about Ukraine and so on, Russia has cut itself off from the West. It cut itself off from Europe. And there are very, very few ways for Russia to go back and to re-embrace or rebuild this relationship with Europe. We don't see it happening, right? It's not happening. So in those circumstances, Russia is actually very, very, very dependent on China. Well, I mentioned that, right? Yeah, okay, that means that China is not necessarily, it doesn't mean that China is able to crack its whip, but this dependence still benefits China because we can see that they can drive a bargain with the Russians on oil, on gas, in various other ways. And this relationship, does it not suit the Chinese leadership? If I were in Xi Jinping's shoes, I would say, actually, that suits us just fine. Russia is a kind of a junior partner. We don't push them around too much, but they basically, they are basically in a position, they've put themselves into this position that where they cannot have a reasonable relationship with the West, and therefore they can only just have a good relationship with us. So that is going to be facilitated further by the by stalemate in Ukraine, and that I think is why the Chinese preferred position is a stalemate. Now, I know that I've run out of time. That's why we should never allow me to speak without speaking notes. I should at least get to my main point, which was about Europe. So let me leave my main point out of it, and we will get to my main point maybe in the discussion. I will later return to this, but I think we should, I should end here anyway before I'm chased out of the room. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you all for your intervention. Now, let's start the Q&A session. Who wants to break the ice? Please, your name and country. If you agree, I ask you to listen to more questions, maybe 3 questions, and then answer at the end. Please.
Yes, good evening. First, thank you very much for this really interesting panel. Okay. So my name is Lydia Hubert. I'm French and Romanian, and I'm a student here in Master of International Affairs. My question is for President Prodi. So you were president of the European Commission when 10 countries joined the EU. When the Nizza Treaty was adopted, you proposed the constitutional treaty, which, by the way, as a French, I really apologize for. So you witnessed a golden age of the EU, and my question is the following. How did the great powers see this, pardon the expression, but this step forward of the EU, and in particular China? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Lydia. The second question.
Thank you, Professor Prodi and Professor Fardella, for coming to speak to us. My question is centered around Francesco from the MEPP program here at SAIS. And my question is basically centered around the BRI and Italy being the only country within the G20 to have taken part in the BRI. And now it's Foreign Minister Tajani saying that it was an atrocious decision and that they want to pull out of the BRI. I would like to just get your thoughts on what you think of Italy pulling out of the BRI, the Belt and Road Initiative, and what the consequences of that sort of a decision and that sort of a fracture will be like for the relations going forward. And I know we're panda huggers, but the economic and the political thing is quite easy to separate. And I think that's very much on the economic aspect of it. It's, leaving aside the human rights issues and the non-shared values. Just let's focus on the economics. I agree. Yeah, it is probably better. Right?
So there is another question. I don't know.
Hello, thank you very much for coming, all the speakers. My name is Mathieu Le Breton. I'm French and I'm a first-year MAIR student. You spoke about re-engagement. I think my question is mainly related to that and the sort of, we said, we've gone from embrace to disgrace. How do we get back to embrace? I think it's very important to re-engage China, particularly, as you said, given the sort of economic downturn it's facing in the next few decades and the grave structural problems it has looking forward in its development. So you mentioned electric vehicles, you mentioned rare minerals in China and the export of those to Europe. And also climate on, for example, renewable technologies or cooperation on renewable technologies. Where do you think the main areas that Europe specifically, not the US, can re-engage with China in order to sort of, I guess, patch up this relationship and try and steer the ship in a positive direction?
Thank you.
Three questions.
Lydia, Francesco, Mattia.
Well, enlargement. Very clear, China was not interested in that, do what you want, good relation with the European Union. If you are 15 or 25, I don't care. China was interested in trade, and so their interest after that was in some way to divide Europe in terms of exploiting different interests. And so they also made the wrong idea of 16 plus 1 in order to, let's say, engage with some European countries in a special way and to make special treatment, divide et impera, divide and rule. This was the Chinese attitude, to exploit the enlargement of Europe, nothing else. Well, much more interested with the relation with Putin, because it's clear that I was dealing the enlargement also with Putin, because the big neighbor, 8 of the 10 countries were former members of the Warsaw Pact. So I was going into Putin interest. And the situation was very clear. Romano, do what you want. I don't care about enlargement. I don't want NATO. The obsession of Putin was NATO. And is still NATO. And I was surprised that to have no problem for the economic the enlargement of the European Union. But what was the situation? All the new countries, they preferred NATO to European Union. And it was difficult for me and impossible to explain, look, I manage only European Union, but I assure you that your security is granted also being member of European Union. But with the Polish or Baltic leaders, the priority was only NATO. So I found myself with managing the peaceful part of that, but leaving a question mark on what NATO was, and Putin was really upset, but for what he called the American betrayal. Let's say the American promised us not to get arrive to the European, to the Russian borders with NATO, and they did it with the Baltic countries. This was the real obsession, and the European situation in that moment was really divided, as Europe has always been on foreign policy. But the last day of my government, I had already had the non-confidence vote, or I had when I was in Bucharest for the NATO meeting, and Germany, Italy, and France, we voted against the entrance of Ukraine and Georgia into NATO. But then we accepted the American compromise. We don't have it now, but in the future, but in any case, Bush was really pushing us personally to have Ukraine and Georgia into the NATO in 2000 and 2008. This is the relations we had, but I cannot forget when I was telling to Putin, look, Russia is from the industrial point, because we had very frank discussion, even one by one. I remember, I am professor of industrial organization, and Vladimir, Russia industry is very weak, and this was, I thought, you cannot stay alone. Either you stay with Europe or you go with China. And I think your interest to stay with Europe, blah, 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 blah. But I cannot forget his answer, Romano, I shall not sell any cubic meter of gas to China. And then, the situation changed so much, and as you have for Belt and Road, I think was I don't know whether a misunderstanding or but the first proposal was some sort of Europe-China relation, really historical, not the idea of China going everywhere with the Belt and Road, And second, the first idea, but only the first idea, was some sort of maritime cooperation. But then Belt and Road has become a Chinese decision. There was not any cooperation. I remember in one of the meetings I told, look, why don't we decide? I don't want to have some special interest or Chinese investments, but let us agree to build 20 hospitals in Ethiopia, just to show that this is some sort of proletarian agreement for both the countries. But this has always been managed as a Chinese instrument, and coming back to the first question, also an instrument to divide Europe. The 16+1 agreement was a special treatment of Eastern European countries, former members of the Warsaw Pact, many of them, and Greece plus, you know, and Greece has done a lot of advantage. It's gotten a lot of advantage. The port of Piraeus and the railroad going to North Europe has made Greece a trade center for the Mediterranean. That was absolutely not the case. And this was a very intelligent Chinese way of dividing the European interests.
Thank you, Professor. I don't know, do you want to add something?
It's Fardella job.
To add something or to add something on these points. Okay, so Francesco on the Belt and Road. Okay, so this is a long story. Let me focus on the end of the story, because like the way how it was conceived, you know, there is a tendency sometimes to overblame the Italians. I mean, of course, we are not, we have our responsibilities. But the Belt and Road itself also changed. China has changed. You know, you cannot say that China today is the same China of 2014, 2015, when people got overexcited with the Belt and Road. You know, that was like a very timely initiative in the sense that, you know, Europe was coming out of the financial crisis, you know, and Italy was desperately searching for, you know, for investment. And if you just like move back and start looking at the media at the time, you will see like how actually the first promoter of the Belt and Road were not the parties, the populist parties that were blamed to sign the memorandum of understanding, but actually were the very elegant and legitimate parties like the Democratic Party. Matteo Renzi, Gentiloni, you know, they were, you know, the one who actually signed the first Chinese investment in 2015 in the key sector of Italian economy. That was the first step of the Belt and Road. Gentiloni joined the forum, the Belt and Road Forum in 2017. I was there. If you read the final statement of the Belt and Road Forum, you Google it, 2017, it was way more advanced than the Memorandum of Understanding signed in 2019. So, zeitgeist change. So what was done in 2019 was happening in a different political climate, you know, and that's why, and was done specifically by a government that, of course, had used this card, you know, the China card, in an anti-European Union and anti-American, you know, fashion. You know, you can criticize it, but you know, this is a fact. You know, you can support it, but that's what I. So the reality is that, you know, it was democracy. You know, we changed government, so the counter government, you know, tried to ride, you know, the China rise, you know, in an anti-European Union, you know, to promote an agenda that, of course, had a very strong domestic constituency, you know, leftist and anti-American, anti-European constituency. So was using the Memorandum of Understanding, you know, to get electoral support. As a matter of fact, if you remember, that was March 2019, the same moment when the European Union actually, you know, labeled China systemic rival. And few months later, there were the European election, exactly like today. And so the two main parties of the government at the time, the League and the Five Star Movement, were competing for the European election. So the Five Star Movement, you know, entitled itself the China dossier. The League started becoming a China basher, you know. And so, but there was no strategic plan of foreign policy. Foreign policy was simply sacrificed for domestic interest. Full stop. New government comes in, the Meloni government is a different government. Meloni has always been consistent on China, has always been critical on China since day one. So they just simply change, and what they are doing is they are repackaging the relationship with China from a multilateral framework, the Belt and Road Initiative, that is now becoming, you know, Luciferian, and they put, you know, returning to the bilateral, you know, framework. Italy is leaving the Belt and Road. You know, maybe they were waiting for the anti-coercion instrument of the European Union. That's why I mentioned it before, to be approved, because, you know, if China retaliate after the email sent by the government, that's what Meloni said, it just takes one email. So if they will send the email to the Beijing government and say, okay, bye-bye, Belt and Road, and the Beijing government, for some reason, retaliates, this could be the first case, of application of anti-coercion instrument by the European Commission. Then we have Mattia, re-engagement. This is actually a very difficult question, Mattia. Is the key question. So let me tell you two things. The way how things, in my opinion, will develop. Okay. The risking means diversifying, or namely, they call it friendly shoring. Okay, there is no more economy first. Economy, politics, and securities are integrated. So this is what is happening. It's like 1950s, basically. Okay, we are moving back to an architecture that is going to become a new architecture, in my opinion, of technology and economic coordination between like-minded countries. Okay, so to a NATO of economy and technology. This is the direction we're going, which is actually economically makes sense. If you read what economists are saying on this topic, especially the Michael Pettis, tribe, I belong to it. So this helps clarity and firmness with China, and this works. Okay, because we overstepped. There was too much. The over-dependence, too much, also sacrifice of European values, European interest, because, there is no much difference. If you make a difference, eventually you're going to pay the price for it, okay, because you become someone else. But at the same time, the European Union has to show prospect for cooperation with China, especially, we have the know-how, we have the technology, the knowledge technology to help the Chinese to correct the economic model, because we have been there. The US have been there. We know how to fix it. Okay, so this could be helpful. And as a matter of fact, the only good prospect, Sergey, for next week conversation between China and the European Union is that until last week there was this ticking bomb that was about to explode, because the European Union was supposed to add in the 12th round of sanctions lots of Chinese companies, because the European Union say that 70% of technology used by Russia against Ukraine has been is imported from China. Okay, so a lot of Chinese companies, because of what their role over on Ukraine, they're going to be, they may be this has been cancelled from the discussion that is going to take place in Beijing. This is very important. It means that the Chinese gave something back. Okay, so this is a good prospect. Okay, so clarity, firmness, and then cooperation and results.
So thank you. So we have finished our time. It was what? Yes, it was an interesting and rich panel, and a very timely topic indeed inside of the next EU-China summit in Beijing, and the emergence of a new EU Commission and maybe a new China policy after the election in 2024. Thank you very much, Professor Prodi, Enrico, Sergey. Thank you very much for your intervention, for your helpfulness. Thank you, followed us remotely and from Formiche website. Thank you for your presence. Bye.
Thank you, Flavia. And thank you to the friends from Formiche.